That's right, the Pokémon anime is finally doing what nobody thought it would ever do, a time skip. Yes, the show is aging up the characters, so here's what it means for the Pokémon anime, for Pokémon in general, and even for Ash Ketchum. And for just a second, we've got to rewind to 2022, because back then, the possibility of a time skip wasn't on anyone's radar. And even when Ash was on the road to win the World Coronation Series, we thought he'd keep adventuring and keep being 10 years old. Forever. I mean, earlier that year, the general director of the Pokémon anime himself even came out and talked about exactly why Ash never ages. In the setting of the animation, the main character Ash is forever 10 years old, and the background season is forever early summer. And on top of that, a day of summer vacation repeats perpetually. This is what I've hoped to create, a view of the world that would be an ideal for children. Honestly, there is something amazing about the floating timeline that Ash lived on, where summer never ends and characters never age, that even if we grew up, Ash never did. So he was always young, full of dreams, and his only limit was his imagination, which made it so that watching him took you back to that feeling of summer break when you were a kid, where every day was a new adventure and you never needed to work 9 to 5, clean poo, or do other adult things that are way less fun than running around the forest with your friends. I think the eternal summer that Yuyama talked about is a huge part of the old anime's appeal that kept hardcore fans glued to the show for so many years. Except, let's be real, we all wanted to see Ash Ketchum grow up, at least a little bit, and now Pokémon Horizons is finally breaking the anime's biggest rule by aging up the cast, which also increases the chances of eventually seeing a grown-up Ash. And before we talk about how that could happen, here's how the time skip in Pokémon Horizons is going to work. Basically, after a shocking conclusion to the current anime arc, either naturally or through some kind of time distortion, the cast will be older by the time the next season starts. I mean, just look at Liko. She's got a new outfit and a new hairstyle, her indigo clip is snapped into 2 pieces, and most importantly, she's very long. Personally, I preferred Liko's color scheme from the old series, or should I say the young series, but she still looks pretty cool. Then we've got the older version of Roy, who basically turned into Guel from Gundam, meaning that he looks way more badass than when he was younger. And there are 2 things that really pop out about his design. First, he's got a bracelet with a megastone, and second, he's got this new vest that looks like he cut up Professor Freed's coat with a pair of scissors. This is actually an important point, because Professor Freed was the kind of trainer that Roy always dreamt of becoming, a powerful adventurer who everyone could count on. And even Roy's partner Pokemon dreamt of becoming cool and strong just like Freed's Charizard. But unfortunately for Freed, it looks like he's getting sealed just like Gojo got sealed in Jujutsu Kaisen, which is actually pretty funny since we were already joking about how similar these characters were way back in 2023. And with Freed now out of the picture, I guess that Roy's vest symbolizes how he is going to be taking on the role of his old mentor as the group's protector. Personally, I'll miss Freed since he's such a cool character, but it does make perfect sense that he's leaving. After all, one major criticism of the first 2 years of Pokémon Horizons was that Freed was constantly bailing Liko and Roy out of trouble, especially in the first year, which really seemed to slow their character growth. Of course, it turns out that showing how much Liko and Roy over-relied on Freed was how the anime set up their development from weak trainers into fairly capable trainers, which is what the Terastal training arc was all about. And fortunately, they leveled up enough to stand on their own 2 feet just in time. As for Dot, she looks less tomboyish and more like a big, awkward caterpillar, and I'm not exactly sure what I think about this aged up design, since it doesn't exactly project visually that she's becoming more confident and strong, which has been one of the key developments in Dot's character arc. But we'll see what happens. On the other hand, all the crew's Pokemon look pretty much the same, except that Terapagos is now fast asleep in a Pokeball. It's also worth noting that Captain Pikachu is still around, because Pikachu, and that since he's Freed's best buddy, it's really touching to see him holding onto Freed's goggles as a reminder of their time together. Also, Roy now has a shiny Mega Lucario, and frankly, I don't know about you, but I am disappointed that we are seeing yet another Lucario partner, not just because the shiny is about as cool as Old Mustard, but there are just so many other interesting Pokemon that could be partnered with Roy, like Hitmonchan. Unfortunately, no matter what risks the Pokemon anime is willing to take, it seems that there is no escape from Pikachu, Charizard, or Lucario. Now, obviously, since the new season is called Mega Voltage, the show will tie into the upcoming Pokemon Legends ZA video game, so the setup for a lazy Lucario shtick was just too easy. What's more interesting is the brand new character Uruto and his partner. We don't know if Uruto is a friend or an enemy just yet, but we do know that he has a hairy mantine on his head, and more importantly, he's buddies with with a Sableye, one of my favorite Pokemon. Not to mention that Mega Sableye is a much more refreshing Mega Pokemon to bring into the main cast than Mega Lucario. My guess is that Uruto himself enters the show as a rival but slowly warms up to the party to help fill that masculine void left by Freed, which makes you realize that the only other time we saw that 2-2 male to female party balance, aside from a few cameo situations, was way back in the XY anime with Ash, Serena, Clement, and Bonnie. And we know how much everyone loved that combination, so that could be a good sign. Then again, Uruto could also end up being Roy's equivalent to Gary or Paul, only time will tell. Of course, I'm also wondering what's going to happen to the other Rising Volt tacklers. Presumably we need Orla, Murdoch, Molly, and Ludlow to operate the Brave Olivine, which we can see in the new season's promo poster, so it doesn't look like they are getting sealed or murdered along with Freed, which probably means that they'll age up too. And that is very bad news for Ludlow. Either way, people are hyped about the time skip, not just because it's a first for the anime, but because it's also a pretty rare thing in the Pokemon universe in general. Because even though there's a somewhat clearly defined timeline spanning millions of years, there aren't many examples of characters physically maturing, unless you count Baniri. Games like Gold and Silver and Black and White 2 do show the passage of time to some extent, and even the original Black and White games have seasons, not to mention that the Legends video games show us Sinnoh and Kalos at different times from when we experience them in the main series video games, and it does look like Annabelle ages quite substantially from when we see her in the Battle Frontier to when she shows up in Alola, but seeing human characters physically mature in the Pokemon anime and the Pokemon video games is still a rarity. On the other hand, we have the Pokemon Adventures manga, because in Pokemon Adventures, time passes and the characters actually do get visibly older. For example, Red. When he debuts as the main character in the first Pokemon Adventures chapter way back in March 1997, just a month before Ash debuts in the anime, Red is only 11 years old. But unlike Ash, as the manga progresses, Red actually ages 11, 13, 14, 16, and by the time he appears in the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire arc, he's already 20. Not to forget that that was quite a while ago, so who knows how old he is now. And because he ages, we see Red go through different stages of life, from an ambitious beginner to a confident league winner, to a mentor and a guardian like Freed who shows up to bail out the new generation. Seeing Red grow up has been seriously rewarding, but the time skip in Pokemon Horizons could be either good or bad news for people who love Liko and Roy, because in the Pokemon manga, growing up means making space for the new generation. And people have always suspected that after Ash's departure, the Pokemon anime would start to copy the manga format, bringing in new main characters every 3 to 4 years. So unlike Ash, who never aged, Liko and Roy aging up could mean that they've already got one foot out the door towards their own off-screen adventures. But speaking of Ash, what could the time skip mean for the world champ who's been adventuring off-screen since March 2023? The possibilities are exciting because not only does the time skip break 28 years of the floating timeline format, which opens the door to all kinds of possibilities, but if Ash actually makes a cameo at some point, which people expect he eventually might, since how could the producers say no to the Pokemoney, then we could see an aged up Ash, assuming that the two shows take place on the same timeline, and that post-time skip Pokemon Horizons doesn't start at Ash's 10th birthday or later. Come on guys, make it happen. I mean, there are just so many things that we still want to know about Ash and his future. What exactly do he and Pikachu do after the conclusion of To Be a Pokemon Master? Which Pokemon does he catch during his next adventures? What does he look like when he grows up? Does he finally date one of his travel companions? Does he start his own Pokemon League? Does he have kids? And even more importantly, we just want to see Ash, like Red, show up as a badass big bro to help the next generation of trainers reach their dreams. And it would just be so much cooler if he'd aged up. On one hand, it would be pretty crazy to break Ash's eternal summer that Mr. Yuyama talked about back in 2022, but now that the Pokemon Horizons cast are growing up, I'm sure that many of the fans who grew up with Ash would love to see him grow up too.